Guys, Josh here. So I'm a huge fan of THX technology as of lately. This is my daily driver amplifier. It's a drop THX 789. And this amplifier, along with a few other amplifiers from companies like Monoprice, are offering really good bang for your buck. They measure really well. They've got a lot of power. And more importantly, they have a great price given the performance that they offer. And lately, I think THX has been kicking some butt, and I'm all for it. I'm not the only one excited about it, and a lot of people are, and I think Drop realizes that, and they're utilizing that as much as they can. They have produced a headphone called the Panda, which is this headphone right here. And this is a Bluetooth headphone priced at $400. And they had an event this past weekend. They did invite me to the event. They did offer to fly me out there, and I appreciate the offer, but I did ultimately end up passing. And that was to kind of showcase and get some press around this headphone, and they offered to send the unit for me to kind of review. And I want to give my first impressions today, which is just going to be going over some of the preliminary things, kind of the fit, the build, things like that. Now, real quick disclaimers here, like usual, I'm not being paid or asked to say anything in particular about these headphones. Also, real quick disclaimer, this is a pre-production model, so the final production could be exactly this, or it could be vastly different. It's really not up to me whether or not it's like this or not. So I'm going to talk confidently about the unit that is in my hand, but I can't control the final output of it. So if it's different, I apologize, but it's not my control. So let's talk about the unboxing and the build. So that box right there is what it comes in. It's pretty unassuming, kind of a cardboard box for a headphone that's coming in at the $400 mark. It's not really that premium. Now, in all fairness, you're not really paying for an unboxing experience, you're paying for the headphones. So once you get the headphone out, what is it like? It's got a decent amount of heft, not anything like an LCD or anything like that where you're talking about a really big headphone, but it's decently weighty, definitely heavier than similar Bluetooth headphone like some of the new Bose and some of the new Sony headphones are quite a bit lighter. Now, this headphone does feel pretty solid, and it's worth noting that the unit that I have in front of me, outside of some very, very, very minor things, it feels like a finished product. It feels like if I bought this and got this and it was finished, it feels like how I'd imagine it would feel once we're actually got the production up and rolling. So I want to talk about the one and only build issue that I've noticed so far. Otherwise, it's been pretty smooth. So this material on the bottom, the closest thing that I can kind of equate it to is the actual Bose 700. It's got that same silicone feel, except this doesn't have the padding, whereas that one's more plush. This one is kind of, it's stiffer, and it doesn't really have the padding underneath kind of the silicone layer. So it's pretty smooth, and it's comfortable enough. But the issue that I'm running into with this is that all four sides of this, on the corners here, kind of where it starts to curve more severely, it's starting to kind of separate. Now, you can honestly just stick it back in there, but when you see it, it kind of seems like it's starting to peel. It's not, but it doesn't quite fit the headband perfectly. It's a pretty minor complaint, but that's really the only one I've found in terms of the actual build quality so far. Otherwise, it's a pretty robust build. It is primarily plastic, but when you squeeze it and move it around, it doesn't make any noise or anything like that. So overall, it's pretty well made. I do have one complaint though. So you got the right and the left ear cup indicators, but the way that they swivel, they only swivel outwards. So when you take this off your head, you can only put it down like this, and you'd have to turn it over to put it on the pads. I prefer headphones that can either swivel both ways or can swivel downwards so that you can rest them on the pads and you're not going to wear the back of the headphone out over time. Not a major complaint, but it's something that I've never understood why companies do that. Now, the headband structure itself is kind of the single band arm system. It doesn't have this standard kind of fork that holds most headphones together. It's got the single band. It does seem like a pretty solid connection, and I don't imagine it would wear out too quickly over time. The pads are pretty nice. If you're familiar with the LCD1, they feel about equivalent in terms of size and feel to the LCD1. The ear opening is big enough to accommodate my ear, and the pads do kind of taper inwards a little bit, so you get a little bit more wiggle room for your ears in there if you do have larger size ears. Now, the overall fitment for me is pretty good. There's a bit of clamp pressure, which for a wireless headphone that I'm going to be getting up and moving around for, I actually kind of like. It instills a lot of confidence. For wired headphones, I do prefer kind of the more sitting on your head feel, like the HC800, for example. But for a wireless headphone, I really like kind of the confidence knowing that it's definitely going to stay on my head, and I can shake my head and it's not going to fall off or anything like that. So, you know, I do appreciate that. So in terms of isolation, not noise cancellation, but isolation, I'd say it's about a 6 out of 10. It's not the best I've heard, but definitely not the worst. And I think it's going to be passable in kind of quiet to medium environments, but you're not going to, for example, block out the sound of a plane or block out the sound of a city. It's not quite that level. In terms of inputs, you can either listen to this in Bluetooth mode or a wired 3.5 millimeter, which is included. And I appreciate the addition of that. It's got USB-C charging, which is great to see. And then on the bottom section here, it's got what looks like 3 different microphones. And I don't know if this pre-production model is going to, you know, maybe it's just testing different locations for the microphones. I don't really understand why you would need 3, but whatever, that's above my pay grade. And then it's got an interesting joystick, which I actually really like. So this joystick is, you know, press and hold to turn on, press and hold along to pair, and then you can move it around left, right, up, down, and that controls multimedia functions. And I do like the system over like multiple buttons that you're kind of like feeling around for, like, okay, is this the right button, or is this play, pause, or is this one skip? So I appreciate the joystick functionality, and it's all in one button, and it's easy to feel, and you just know what you're doing with it. So I appreciate that. To sum up the actual quality of the build, like I said before, this feels like a final production unit. It's even got, they do make a little bit of noise on this one, but it even has cup springs that push the cup back into place. Like, I'm not moving it, it's moving itself. This one makes a little bit of noise though, but not that big of a deal. So I'm going to talk briefly about the sound quality coming out of this, but I've only listened to it on Bluetooth so far. So I'll judge the headphone when I do the final review after a little bit of burn-in and some, you know, a really thorough listening session on Bluetooth. And then I'll also test it on an actual amplifier to see what the headphone's capable of and how different that is, if any, from what the actual headphone amplifiers are able to put out. So for volume, for most music, I'm around the 60 to 70% level. I can turn this all the way up on quiet songs, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of hissing. It doesn't really seem to have a lot of kind of amplification noise, which is a good thing. So you can listen to quiet music a little bit more loudly and not be punished for it, which is good to see. They seem to be staying well within the limitations of whatever amplifier is in here. Now, again, this is just the Bluetooth mode, and I will be more thorough when I get to the final version of the review. The top end doesn't seem to extend super well. It does seem a little bit darker and more mid-range and bass focused. So it does miss a little bit of those crispy notes, but it does seem to have pretty good vocal separation. The vocals have this nice kind of in your head presentation. Mid-range detail is pretty good. Again, a little bit lacking in the top end detail though. So you're not really getting these really crispy feeling notes for things like drums. You're not really getting that finishing top end. But when it comes to kind of the vocal range, it seems very nuanced and very able to display whatever the characteristics of that vocalist are quite well. And the recordings themselves feel pretty clear, actually, for a closed back headphone. They have a good level of clarity where the vocalist seems very well isolated from the music. So the bass response so far is not overkill, which I like. I think they had the opportunity to kind of go a little bit overboard. You know, if you're coming from a slightly lower end closed back Bluetooth headphone, like some of the Skull Candy headphones, which just have this very large, very abundant amount of, you know, mostly mid bass, and they just got a shitload of bass. This is a lot cleaner than that. It does seem to have a good level of dynamics and control to the bass response. But it's not overkill, which I actually think is a good thing. And I think for you know, sound quality, it's actually quite nice and quite pleasing. It doesn't have this really large amount of mid bass. It seems pretty even so far. But again, I'll do more testing and be more thorough in the full review. Imaging and soundstage are like, I mean, I guess I have to grade this a little bit on a scale of a closed back headphone. So it's decent for the price. I probably list it about a 7 out of 10 for both. It's not extremely wide, nor is it extremely precise. I think with perhaps more top end resolution, you could get that precision down probably to like a 9. And I'm not sure if that's going to happen on the final model or not. Or, you know, this is definitely something you could probably attain via EQ if you wanted to. Now that's just breaking things down into an individual level. If I were to kind of look at this as a whole, I find this to be a very pleasing sound signature. I find this to be very enjoyable, pretty easygoing. It's something that I could personally listen to for hours and hours and hours, and I don't think it'd be fatiguing. So when I do the review, I'm gonna bring up a competitor. Actually, after this, I'm probably gonna go buy a Bose 700 just to have a $400 headphone to compare against, because it's entirely possible that it stomps on other Bluetooth headphones. I just personally haven't heard one in a while. So I'll have more comparative information against competitors in that review. Please subscribe if you're interested in seeing that. And hopefully I'll see you in about a week or week and a half for that kind of full review of the Drop Panda. All right, guys. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Josh, signing off.